Fatimah Ghanty, Registered Psychologist in Mauritius. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to speak to you. And I mean this from a place of, I don't want to say complete ignorance, but I think the way I want to approach today is really just throwing out questions and listening to you because you're the expert in the field. But I also feel like because you're quite connected to the Mauritian population, but equally more young people on your platforms, it'd be interesting to know what are some of the things that people come to you about. So maybe before we set the scene, can you give us an idea of your background? What have led you into the field of psychology?
So I have studied psychology. So I have a degree and a master's in psychology. So I did my degree in Canada and my master's in the US. So I remember since I was very young, I wanted to be a psychologist.
You did?
Initially, I wanted to be a child psychologist.
Okay.
But then when I started my degree, I realized, okay, maybe working with the adult population is something that I'm more inclined towards because there's so many things. When I was studying, I realized there's so many things that we normalize that are actually not normal. And I'm not talking only about Mauritius, I'm talking like globally. So I thought that, I wanted to help people to realize certain things that are not normal, like help people to break certain patterns. So I changed. I thought that maybe I want to work with adults more.
Right.
Because with children, the type of therapy we do is a bit different. So throughout my studies, I wanted to work more with adults.
Right.
And then, that's how it started.
When you speak to Mauritians in general, what are some of the major things or major themes that they come to you about?
Yeah. So a lot of people, they come to me about stress and anxiety mostly. Some people suffer from depression. But when you go to a psychologist, they will try to help you to get to the root of the problem. So most people who have anxiety and depression that came to me, most of the problems are rooted in the childhood. And most people, they don't realize that they have always been depressed. And this is something that they realize in therapy. Or people realize that they have always had anxiety. But when you are growing up, especially when you're an adolescent, you don't realize that. You don't realize, okay, there may be something going on internally, right? Because your judgment and your critical thinking and self-awareness is not really fully developed in adolescence. It's only in the early 20s that they realize, I'm not okay. But most people who come to me with any form of mental health condition, they realize that what is rooted in that mental illness is some difficulties that they've had in their childhood. So we mostly work on complex trauma, which we call childhood trauma.
Okay, that's interesting because I do feel childhood trauma is something that we haven't been openly talking about.
Yeah.
Society as it is made up of different family structures. Some children come from a divorce background where the parents have gone for a divorce, some from a single parent family structure, some have been raised by their grandparents, increasingly obviously with LGBTQ being a bit more accepted. Some children will be grow up in families where there are two fathers or two mothers versus the traditional one father and one mother. When you think about childhood trauma, are people more cognizant of it? Are people more self-aware of it now? Are they more ready to talk about it?
Actually, like most people who come to see me, when I tell them, maybe you've had some form of childhood trauma, most people were unaware of it. Because as you said, when we think of childhood trauma, we think of the examples that you've mentioned.
The most obvious ones.
Right. But most people, at least in Mauritius, most people who went through some kind of childhood trauma, they had everything growing up. Their parents were living together. They came from middle class or upper class families. They went for family vacations, went to private schools. So in their mind, how can they have childhood trauma if they had everything growing up? Because we focus more on the material things or having everything like your having financial stability, having your physical needs met. But we often ignore the emotional aspect of it, the psychological aspect of it, because if you had everything growing up, this is the physical things, right? But childhood trauma is also the invisible trauma. So no one can see it. Only the person that is going through it feels it, right?
I find therapy and psychology very fascinating. I myself have been through therapy twice. And I think it's one of those things that you say to someone, yeah, I've been to a therapist, and they're like, why? Everything is going perfectly in your life.
Right.
I'm sitting in front of you, and I'd like to think that I've had a very normal upbringing and a very normal childhood, like happy memories, a core family upbringing, mom and dad being around, like siblings and all that. Do you think I can have childhood trauma?
Yeah, because, like having everything, you still could have childhood trauma because, you could have like parents who lived together. They were maybe they were never fighting every day, or maybe you had a lot of privileges. But childhood trauma is also whether the parents create a safe space for the child. So often what causes the trauma is the child grows up in an environment where they don't have a safe space, where they cannot express how they feel, because often the feelings are invalidated. Invalidation is a big cause of childhood trauma, and invalidation also increases a child's risk to develop personality disorders later in life. So invalidation means parents invalidate how they feel. They don't acknowledge the feelings. Or another cause of childhood trauma is emotional neglect. A child could have everything growing up, and yet the parents don't have time to spend to the child, playing with the child, being attuned to the child's emotional need.
Right.
A lot of children, like adults, realize when they were a kid, they grew up feeling abandoned by their parents. Their parents were there physically, but a lot of people in therapy, they say they felt like they had parents without having parents. A lot of adults say they were bullied in primary school, but they couldn't go back home and tell their parents because they didn't feel like their parents cared enough,
It's also interesting bringing that into perspective, because I feel like there is a sort of generational gap eventually that we're trying to bridge, especially when you listen to like South Asian kids and they talk about how, for instance, it will be the little things about going to the parents about, for me, like it's one of the simple examples is money, right? We come from a generation where we want to travel, we want to see the world, and yet we have been brought up with the mindset of save for tomorrow, always save for tomorrow. I mean, that's nothing to do with what we're talking about, but there is a generational gap eventually when it comes to emotion and the way we deal with our anxiety, our stress, our emotions and our feelings. As a generation, we're more open about it, and we're more ready to face it on, while we come from a generation, or at least we come from a family upbringing where hush, let's not talk about it.
Yeah, right. Because, especially in South Asian communities and families, like there's also that aspect of shame and judgment, right? A lot of parents, unfortunately, they feel a lot of shame if their child is struggling mentally, because in South Asian families and communities, like if you're struggling mentally, what will people think? The parents reflect that on themselves. If someone sees that my child is going to a psychologist, would that mean that I'm a bad parent? Or like, let's say if their child is going through something difficult, like emotionally, like bullying or whatever, would that mean that I'm not able to be a good parent to my child? So I think parents themselves, especially in the past, it's less today, but parents in the past used to struggle with a lot of shame. And that shame causes them to fear judgment. So that's why they wouldn't want to, bring the child to see.
So true.
And it also happened with sexual abuse on children, right? In the past, especially, what would people say if our child has been sexually abused? So the child growing up thinking that it wasn't a big deal. So they never processed the sexual abuse when they were growing up, because there's a lot of shame that the parents themselves are carrying, and that shame causes them to fear judgment of the community or family or the society in general.
And the sad reality is that if you take a look at the statistics and cases that we would know of, so many times sexual abuse happens within the family.
Yes, I do believe stranger danger is a myth. Most people who have been sexually abused as a child is by someone they knew and they trust. So to not taint the family's image, it's better to keep it quiet,
Or not having to deal with the parents' guilt.
Right. Yeah, right. Because the parents, when your child is going through something, has nothing to do with your parenting, But unfortunately, in the South Asian communities, parents always think
take it on themselves.
I think it's because they themselves have a low self-esteem. That's why I think it's a generational trauma. If the parents themselves grew with a low self-esteem, they're more likely to take everything personally. They're more likely going to struggle with the shame. And they're going to project that shame onto their child if their child is struggling.
I think it would be naive of me to say that there's somehow a solution to all of this, and there's the ultimate healing path. What are some of the coping mechanisms that come up during your conversations with your clients?
Yeah, most of the time it's a very low self-esteem, right? A low self-esteem is people think so low of themselves in terms of their core beliefs. And what strikes me is that I had so many laureates come to me over the years.
Interesting.
Right? And a lot of people, like, you would think, oh, wow, that's such a big deal. You're a laureate.
It is a big deal in Mauritius.
To a star school in Mauritius, and you've been to like an amazing university. And the first thing they tell me, what strikes me is, oh, anyone could have done it, which is not true. Although technically it's true. But the reality is not everyone can be a laureate, right? It requires a lot of hard work, effort, and, it's a personal journey. So it's a lot of sacrifices that someone has to do over the years. But a lot of laureates that I've found coming to me, they say, it's not a big deal, everyone can do this. And when we go down to it, they struggle with feelings of inadequacy, not good enough, worthlessness. So they tend to minimize their success. That's one example. Another example, like successful people come to me and they say, oh, it's just nothing, and it doesn't mean anything. It's not a big deal. So why I'm saying this to you is, you wouldn't think only people who didn't succeed in their life would have a low self-esteem. Someone who could be a high flyer and someone who could have achieved so much in their life. I mean, you look at them, you're like, wow, your journey is so incredible.
Right.
But deep down, they still struggle with feelings of worthlessness. So your self-esteem is not based on your achievements and what you have, what you portray. It's the core beliefs that you carry about yourself.
Right. And would there be a way, or at least a few ways of dealing with it?
Your self-esteem is based on your behavior. For you to know what your true level of self-esteem is, because those beliefs, I am worthless or I am inadequate, is not like, it's very unconscious. You're not really aware of it. But how you behave would reflect what your true level of self-esteem is. For instance, people with a low self-esteem, they will always stay within their comfort zone. They would want to hide. They don't want to show their true self. They won't take risks. They have fewer friends. They usually struggle with anxiety and depression. So one way to deal with this is really look at your behavior, and your behavior would indicate what your true core belief is. And the way to deal with this, realize this is something that you've learned based on how you have been treated as a child. So if you have had dismissive parents, if your needs, emotional needs were not met, if there was so much pressure for you to succeed academically, having 50% wasn't good enough. You had to have 90 and above. That has led you to think and feel not good enough and worthless. But who you are today has nothing to do with those core beliefs. So first of all, you have to learn that those core beliefs are learned. And this has been registered in your mind and that has become part of who you are today. So a big therapeutic work is to help people see themselves for who they are.
Right.
And not based on their success and achievement, because you're not always going to succeed and achieve in your life.
You don't take it to your grave, certainly.
Right. So who you are today is based on your values, your intentions, how you treat people. So helping people find that. And this is a true reflection of your self-worth.
That's beautiful. Do you believe in the ability of someone to self-parent himself or herself?
Yes. Actually, it is possible, but it is difficult. I've seen some people do it, but it is difficult because whatever you've been through in your life, whether it's like having a low self-esteem, whether it's like self-sabotaging behavior, people-pleasing, you don't see this as a problem, because this is the only exposure that you've had since your childhood. So it's difficult for you to parent yourself if you're doing things, even if it's self-sabotaging, you think it's normal, right? You need an external person to tell you this is not normal. For instance, I've dealt with so many clients who struggle with people pleasing, but for them it's normal,
Right.
to put themselves last. So you can't prioritize yourself if you do not believe like prioritizing yourself is important.
People pleasing, I feel, is such an interesting topic because we live in a society. I'm going to get I probably will face some criticism for this, but it doesn't matter. But I do feel like in the West, obviously, there is obviously elements of people pleasing, but I think the West have gone past the threshold of like not caring. While in South Asian communities, and maybe it's the way communities are formed, there is a big element of people pleasing. And someone said something to me quite recently, and they said, well, you'll always be fearful of judgment because you'll always want to please people. And sometimes you need to learn to say no, and people will stop being pleased. And that's fine. Like the idea of just saying no, like it's little things, right? Within like family, like going to every single family dinner, which I love, by the way. But at some point, even if I were to say no, my dad would be like, yeah, but they've made efforts, or what about this and what about that? But I think even with the bigger conversations when it comes to women, the idea of something we've talked about with a few guests on this podcast, like the idea of women emancipation, where do you get married? Do you want kids? Like men don't face it as much as women.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's because the stereotypes that we have, you know, like the older you're getting, your eggs are getting, you know, like
depleted.
Right. So you need to have a child. But it's not true. You know, actually, I was watching a TikTok the other day where I think a gynecologist from the US, she was saying most of her patients now are getting pregnant as from 40 to 44. And in the US and Canada, and I guess in Europe as well, getting pregnant at an older age is getting more normalized because now with medical advancements and so on. But in Mauritius, unfortunately, because we are not exposed to this new kind of research and medicine and all of that, people still think that you should get pregnant. Although it could be safer to get pregnant before 40, but I think there's so many stereotypes still in Mauritius, and that causes a pressure on women, right? Like let's say you go to a wedding and someone say, oh, you're 35, you don't have a baby yet. You're not going to put your boundaries, you're just going to laugh it off. Because I think people pleasing and lack of boundaries. Like one person out of 10 Mauritius doesn't know how to set boundaries, you know?
True.
Because I'm going to tell you, I grew up being the biggest people pleaser you're going to know.
Okay.
Right? It's only when I went for my education in Canada, I said, oh, are people allowed to say no?
That's interesting.
It struck me like, why are my friends saying no? Like, is that even a thing? You know, and that's how I started setting boundaries. Thanks to my friends.
So you realize the power of saying no.
Yeah, right. Because in Mauritius, if you say no, and if you do set your boundaries, you're rude, you're hurting people, you're a bad person, people are going to gossip about you. So I think that's why also Mauritian women struggle to put their boundaries when they're shame about, like, as you said, getting pregnant.
Yeah, I think with me, I haven't necessarily been saying no openly to people, but I certainly said to like my parents, as in regards to other decisions. But I've gone past the level of, it's not even like not caring. I think it's thinking about what's the worst that will happen? What's the worst that will happen if I were to say no? Or what's the worst that will happen if I were not to cave in, or I give in to whatever decision or someone else wants to impose for me? Also, I've already gone against society on some level. Like I've been living abroad, like who knows whether I'll come back or not, but like I haven't like settle. I haven't like got married in my 20s or whatever. I'm still figuring out life. So there's an element of already going past society. But I think it's been beautiful. And I know we're going a bit off tangent here, but more so like throughout these conversations, I feel like it's beautiful that even women of the previous generation, like my mom's generation, it's interesting to see the mindset shifting. They kind of get it because like they've already gone through a level of like, speaking of a childhood trauma, like there's maybe marriage trauma, I don't know. Right. But like when I say marriage trauma, I don't mean like they haven't had a beautiful wedding. My mom and dad have been together and they've had a really good life, touch wood, but they will certainly have ups and downs. And I think even more so now, my mom and I, when we sit down like woman to woman and we have this chat, she does tell me, she's like, this is part of the life that I do not wish for you. This is part of the life I wish for you. Like putting that into perspective and bringing all these different generations together, I think there's somewhat of it's dim, but there's kind of a path of maybe getting closer to healing generational trauma.
And I think we can thank social media for that. Because, you know, when our parents were younger, like there was no social media, so they didn't have that exposure that they have today. And this is why a lot of parents, they're going to do better with their grandchildren. Sometimes we complain that, oh, you didn't do this for me. Like, why are you doing this for my kids? So yeah, I mean, thanks to social media now and a lot of psychologists and doctors and psychiatrists on social media. So now the parents are learning how to do better. So our children are not going to face what we went through because they're going to be better grandparents. But yeah, social media are helping a lot of the older generation to realize their mistakes. And now they're trying to, even if like their children are grown up, they're trying to be better parents now.
I see that. I certainly do. My brother just had a baby. She's 1 month old. She's the first grandchild on both sides. And it's interesting to see like my parents, like obviously being very involved. My mom and dad have always been very involved in our education, but I feel like there's an even like earlier step that I'm like, I don't think you did that for us. Right. But that's because they've now seen our upbringing. They've seen like not what went wrong, but they saw the things that maybe could be done better or differently, and especially adapting to today's society. You know, like taking a baby when they are like, not a few months old, but like past 1 year, taking a baby to swim, for instance. I went swimming at the age of like 4 or 5, but like to see like the earlier steps in terms of like their development and formation, I'm like, how did you know about this? But I'm like, oh, okay, kind of the learning of the past and wanting to do things a bit differently.
And a big part of healing also in therapy includes, and that's part of reparenting, includes having an understanding of your parents, you know. Holding grudge against your parents or being always angry towards them is not going to allow you to heal.
Oh, I think you're opening a very sensitive topic now. Let's go into it.
Because, you know, like focusing on the anger and the grudge and the resentment causes you to focus more on the pain and not on the healing. You can only heal when you make peace with the past. And making peace with the past is understanding why they did what they did. Maybe therapy helps a lot of people to understand that they didn't have any better resources. They didn't know how to do any better. Yes, that doesn't change how the person felt or how they still feels, but it helps them to understand that it had nothing to do with them. Because when you're a child and you're growing up, whatever you are receiving is what you believe you deserve. A child who receives criticism, shaming, comparison, pressure. How would they know they deserve better if they've never got better? Right? So someone who struggles with a low self-esteem, it's called low on deservingness as well. Right? Maybe I deserved it. Maybe if I was a better child, my parents wouldn't have done this to me. Or maybe if I got better grades, my parents would be more proud of me. But in therapy, they realize that their parents' behavior had nothing to do with them. It has more to do with their own childhood and their grandparents and how their grandparents, how the parents treated them.
That's interesting because I keep saying that's interesting, but actually so many things have been quite interesting throughout this whole thing, because how do you separate the anger from the realization, and you may or may not make peace with it?
So when you understand your parents' behavior, how their parents treated them, it allows you to understand that your parents' behavior had nothing to do with you. So no matter how good of a child you were, there was nothing that you could have done to prevent them from doing what they did, right? So that helps you to move from a place of anger to peace when you realize that you were just born in a family that was dysfunctional, but understanding that they were suffering themselves. They were not ready to be a parent. They didn't know what they were doing. Allows you to heal because it allows you to see that they were a person who were in pain themselves. So, and also a lot of parents who are trying to be better now, it allows you to get that peace because it helps you to see how they are trying to be a better person.
And then obviously there's no exception, and we just want to make it clear on this podcast, there's no exception for sexual abuse. There's no exception for abuse in any form. Obviously we're not talking about that, but you're certainly talking about the situations where parents themselves couldn't have done better, and there's an element of needing to separate those two as you process it throughout therapy.
You know, like now we're talking about sexual abuse, right? A lot of research has shown that pedophiles were people who were sexually molested themselves. So it doesn't excuse pedophilia, of course. There's absolutely no reason to excuse pedophilia. But everything stems from somewhere, right? So a person who sexually molests a child has been someone who has carried a lot of pain. It doesn't excuse the behavior, of course, absolutely not. But it helps to explain why they became the person they are, right? So if they have not had the exposure to do any better, knowledge, exposure, a safe environment for them to learn from their mistakes, they're gonna project that onto the newer generation. So it applies the same for parents, right? So maybe they didn't know better. They didn't have parents who taught them better. They didn't have that exposure. So whatever they did, they loved their children in the way they knew how to love their children. For example, whose parents encourage them by shaming them, they believe that they should encourage their child by shaming them. You know what I mean? So that understanding allows you, maybe not forgiveness, because you should forgive when you're ready to forgive, but it helps you to make peace with it. So you can shift that anger to understanding. And with time, because it takes time, with time, be more compassionate.
You raised something quite important there, forgiving when you feel ready.
Yeah.
What about not forgiving at all, but still moving on?
And that's okay as well, because there has been some research that shows that when you forgive someone before you're ready, it can be more detrimental to you, right? Forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to be okay with what they did. Someone who has been sexually abused, I mean, sometimes they say they're going to forgive the abuser, right? Because how can you forgive someone who has stolen your vulnerability and has taken advantage of your vulnerability? Forgive them is not for them. Forgiving them is understanding maybe why they did this, but forgiveness is for you to not carry that pain internally, right?
And we had someone here last week, one of the guests we hosted last week, and hers was more on a lighter tone, as in she has a community around her. She's no expert. I just want to make this clear. But it was interesting because she talked about closure and the fact that sometimes closure is overrated and you might have to bring it to yourself without needing it from someone. In cases where you're speaking to people or to your clients about whether it's childhood trauma, heartbreaks, relationship, divorces, cases where you've been let down and disappointed by other people, how do you bring a certain healing to yourself when you haven't necessarily received closure from that particular person or persons with an S?
Something that I think a lot of people don't realize, that they can give themselves their own closure, right? And the reason why people won't give you closure, because giving closure, accepting that you did something wrong, brings a lot of shame and guilt. A lot of those are painful emotions to feel. So a lot of people wouldn't want to feel shame or guilt. In fact, those are emotions that you are trying to run away from, right? If we know a situation is going to make us feel guilt or shame, we wouldn't want to engage in that behavior. But a lot of people have to realize that people are trying to run away from shame and guilt. So they're never going to give you that closure. But closure is something that you can give to yourself. And how you do that is validate your own experiences. A lot of people, when you're talking to your friends, they're going to tell you, but it's not a big deal. It already happened. It happened 10 years ago. You're still worried about that. But validating your own experiences, acknowledging your own pain, acknowledging that it was real to you and you are allowed to still struggle and suffer today, that gives you your own closure.
I do feel like sometimes you may have told yourself that you've moved on, and then it comes a day or on a particular day, an element of memory, or you might reminisce something that will make you realize there's 1% of healing that you're still yet to go through. And one thing beautiful that I've learned, and I'm certainly no expert, but based on my own personal experience, I think I've come to accept that moving on is something very subjective to each and their own. The timing of what they say healing is very different for every single person. Sometimes you talk to friends, right, about a particular heartbreak, and they go, well, if I were in your shoes, or you're still talking about him or her. I take time. I would easily take a few. I've taken 1 or 2 years easily to move on from a previous relationship. So my pace of healing is very different, because also when I'm invested, I'm fully in. So even the unwinding is quite different. The unwinding takes time for me. Whereas I will have friends or even siblings who once they're done, they manage to have a very clear boundary. For me, it's always a bit tangle, and I'm my own healing takes time.
It's interesting you're saying this, because it's so easy to judge something that you don't understand and that you haven't been through, right? So when you're talking to your friends or your family members, it's so easy for them to give you unsolicited advice or invalidate you if they've never been through anything like that. And I think that's something you can hear from. But I also think there's some pain, especially we talked about sexual abuse, and other kind of emotional pain, you can never fully heal from that. Or from, like, let's say, the passing of your parents.
Yeah.
How can you ever get over that grief? No matter how they were as a parent, you still love your parents, right? I think there's some degree of emotional pain that maybe you never fully heal from, but over time and with therapy, you learn how to live with that pain, right? I mean, if someone has been through something so traumatic in their childhood, maybe it's still going to affect them when they're 50. But over years, they have learned how to cope and deal with the pain. And those are skills that therapy also
allows for.
Yeah, right. And it comes with more self-compassion towards yourself.
For this last part of the podcast, one thing I wanted to focus on, more so to give something to the younger generation. One of the maybe more recurring, or maybe things that you tend to address a bit more throughout your social media, is relationship, heartbreaks, and dating. What has changed? Why so many breakups? Why so much hesitancy when it comes to the world of modern dating? And how to cope with relationship failures and dating disappointments. And I know this is a bigger topic and a bigger conversation, but just to get something more practical for people to reflect on. Or there could be people watching you going through something right now where they need a little bit of solace and healing right at the moment.
From what I've seen in my private practice is that most people, we are choosing the wrong partners for us. Most people that I've seen are choosing partners that are similar to their parents. Some people in therapy are like, oh my God, I'm dating my parents, especially if they have had like neglectful parents or emotionally unavailable parents. Something that is coming up, especially a lot on social media these days, is emotional unavailability. So a lot of people are choosing the wrong partners for them. If you've grown up in a home where your parents were emotionally immature or emotionally unavailable, but for you, this is what love means. If love, you've been exposed to love, the kind of love where you have to chase it, or you have to work hard for it, or you have to perform to get it. But this is what love means. Because this is the only thing that your brain has been exposed to. You didn't get like emotionally unavailable parents, then healthy love for you to be able to make the comparison. This is why so many people, men and women, are being attracted to emotionally immature people, emotionally unavailable people, narcissistic partners, because they're trying to replicate their family dynamic, right? So I think a lot of people are choosing the wrong partners. And this is why there's so many breakups and divorce and heartbreaks, right? So for you to sort of attract the right partner, you shouldn't ask yourself what I want, because you want what your parents were, because this is what has been normalized and familiar to you. You should ask yourself, what do I deserve? Because what you deserve as a person is very different from what you want. Your brain always will try to look for what is familiar to you. And I've seen so many people who grew up with emotionally unavailable parents. Some partners who were emotionally available were attracted to them, but this is so unfamiliar to them that they tend to push it away. A lot of people who started dating emotionally available partners, a word that comes often in therapy is bored. They feel bored, actually. And that boredom, it's not actually boredom, it's stability. But this is something that they've never had in their life. So they don't really know how to deal with stability. They think it's boredom because there has always been chaos in their home. They had to perform to get love. They had to chase it. So when someone is giving it to them freely, they tend to push it away and they tend to question that person. What's wrong with that person? What do they want, right? So you have to heal that part of you who believes that you don't deserve any better. Because unless you do that, you're still going to attract emotionally unavailable people or narcissistic people, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
What would be your parting words to people watching you if they were to speak to themselves, addressing their inner child? What do you think are the right words they should be telling their inner child?
Yeah, I think something very profound is start to tell yourself you deserve a love, even if you've never got it, Because a lot of people, why they stay in unhealthy dynamics, whether it's relationships or otherwise, it's because they don't believe they deserve better. One question is, ask yourself, why don't I deserve better? Start to treat yourself like you would treat a friend. Like we don't say to our friends all the horrible things that we say to others. For example, a lot of people struggle with a negative body image. They wear a clothes and say, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly. And then in therapy, I ask them, would you say that to your friends? Oh no, that's horrible. I would never say that to someone else. And I ask them why, because they say, oh, that will hurt that person's feeling. And then I ask them, why do you say this to yourself? They don't realize that they don't deserve those things. All the nasty things that you're saying to yourself on a daily basis, and this runs in your mind all day, every day, throughout the day. Harshness, criticism, shaming. No one else is judging you as much as you're judging yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So really start to treat yourself the same way that you would treat someone else. Always think of a friend. Take the name of a friend. X person. Would I ever say this to this X person? No, because that's harsh and they don't deserve this. Why do I deserve this if X person doesn't deserve this? And then the second part is taking the name of that friend. What would I tell X person in that moment? I would tell them to set their boundaries. If X person deserves to set their boundaries, why don't I deserve to set my boundaries? Actually, you change the relationship that you have with yourself when you start to treat yourself with the same level of kindness and compassion that you have to others. Because everyone, and absolutely everyone, we have kindness and compassion in us, except it's 100% for others and none for us. And something I like to tell people, what would change in your life if the compassion that you give to others, if even 1% you started to give to yourself? And that changes everything in your life.
That's so beautiful. And I did say when I started this chat earlier today that for a very long time I just wanted to listen, because I believe like your expertise will be super helpful to people. And I know we couldn't get into the depth of everything we wanted to talk about. There's just so many topics under the umbrella of like psychology and therapy. But I hope there was something in there, and I'm sure there will be something in there for each and everyone who might be going for something specific, and eventually they know where to find you. Fatimah Ghanty, thank you very much. Was this, I think you said this was your first podcast as much as you've been on social media?
Yeah, I'm so happy you invited me because I've always wanted to be here.
It was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much for your expertise. I will leave your details for people if they want to reach out, certainly. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.